At 5:30 local time, a Russian Buyan-M class corvette drifted quietly in the Sea of Azov. Armed with 8 Kalibr cruise missiles, it was preparing to unleash destruction on Ukrainian cities. For hours, the mission had remained calm. Too calm. That calm was about to shatter in seconds. Unbeknownst to the Russian crew, 7 Ukrainian drones were already hunting them. The lead Rybacha drone accelerated to over 400 kilometers per hour as Russian checkpoint guns opened fire. Tracer rounds tore through the dawn sky, each 23mm shell capable of turning a drone into fragments of burning metal. Then came the real chaos. The checkpoint gunner couldn't see the drones, but he could hear them. That faint, high-pitched whine cutting through the early morning silence. He fired at the sound, walking his rounds toward it. The lead drone banked sharply left, 23mm shells exploding nearby, each detonation close enough to end it. But it pushed harder, climbing to 432 kilometers per hour, streaking past before the gun could adjust. The damage, however, was done. That burst of gunfire had just alerted every Russian position within 10 kilometers. Within minutes, the warning raced through telegram channels faster than military radios ever could. The element of surprise was gone. Suddenly, the operator's monitor filled with static, a flash of interference. Power lines appeared out of nowhere, invisible until the very last second. The drone pulled up violently, clearing 110,000 volts by barely 2 meters. Every instrument went haywire. The compass spun in circles. Video feed flickered. The drone flew blind for 3 long seconds. Then, out of the dark horizon, a radio tower loomed. The operator jerked left, missing the guy wires by inches. Behind that lead drone, 2 more Rybachas followed, each one 30 seconds apart. They slipped through the chaos, exploiting the distraction to advance unseen. Their mission, to blind the corvette's radar defenses before the heavier strike drones arrived. They had to succeed. To the north, 4 Bober drones flew slower, just 200 kilometers per hour, but carrying heavier warheads. They were the hammers that would strike after the Rybachas cleared the path. But Russian defenses were awake now. Telegram warnings had already reached the next checkpoint. There, a Repellent 1 jammer stood ready, flooding the airwaves with 400 watts of electromagnetic noise. The lead drone's feed went black. Signal lost. The Ukrainians had anticipated this. Pre-programmed waypoints instantly took over. The drone switched into autonomous mode, flying blind through the electromagnetic storm, guided only by sensors and terrain recognition. 3 tense minutes later, the video feed flickered back, and the drone was still perfectly on course. But trouble waited ahead. A BTR-82 armored vehicle blocked the highway, its machine gun firing in rehearsed bursts. The operator dove the drone into a nearby industrial zone, using concrete buildings to block line of sight. Yet those same buildings concealed Russian troops. Hearing the whine of drone motors, they poured out like an anthill kicked open. The drone dropped to just 10 meters above ground, hugging the terrain. At that altitude, the Earth's curvature created natural radar shadows. A hilltop radar that could see 50 kilometers at altitude could only detect 12 when the target skimmed the ground. Through these invisible corridors of safety, the swarm weaved onward. But statistics don't favor luck forever. Coordinated fire from a Russian squad finally connected. The 3rd Rybacha spiraled down into a parking lot, its warhead detonating on impact, a ball of fire marking its end. That left 2 Rybachas and 2 Bobers. They could not afford another loss. Minutes later, the lead drone crested the final ridge, and the operator froze. His screen filled with something that should not have been there. The mission briefing was wrong. Disaster loomed in seconds. In just 4 heartbeats, he'd have to make a choice that would either save the mission or destroy every drone in the sky. Suddenly, a Pantsir air defense system lit up and launched 6 missiles. But these weren't ordinary surface-to-air weapons. They were Pantsir-ME anti-drone interceptors, developed after Russian forces were embarrassed by cheap commercial quadcopters in earlier battles. Each missile weighed just 12 kilograms, but carried a fragmentation warhead packed with 200 tungsten spheres. When they exploded, those spheres formed a donut-shaped lethal cloud, expanding outward at nearly 1,800 meters per second. More than enough to shred any small UAV caught in it. The Pantsir operator launched them in a staggered ladder, one at 50 meters, another at 30, then 10, building a 3-dimensional cage of death. Each missile's proximity fuse emitted radio pulses searching for metal to trigger detonation. But the Ukrainian operator had studied these systems for months. He knew their weak point, a 1.2-second safety delay after launch before arming. It was meant to prevent self-detonation near the launcher. At 432 kilometers per hour, the drone would cover 144 meters in those 1.2 seconds. The moment he saw the launch flare, he shoved the control stick forward, diving straight toward the Pantsir. Missiles screamed overhead, still unarmed, passing within meters of the drone but unable to detonate. By the time they armed, the Rybacha was already below them, using the launcher's own safety protocol as its shield. Leveling out at just 5 meters, the drone locked onto the Podlet K1 radar, the system feeding targeting data to every Russian battery within 200 kilometers. The Pantsir's twin 30mm cannons roared to life, each barrel spinning at 5,000 rounds per minute. The gunner used box pattern tactics, sweeping the sky in rectangular kill zones, but the fire control system lagged behind. It needed time, 1.5 seconds to calculate, half a second for servos to aim, and another 1.5 for bullets to travel 2 kilometers. That was a 3.5-second delay, and the drone changed direction every 2. He was always shooting at where the drone had been, never where it was. The Rybacha broke through and slammed into the radar antenna. The shaped charge detonated, creating the Monroe effect. An explosion so focused it turned a copper cone into a hypersonic jet of metal moving at 7,000 meters per second. It sliced through the radar array, the control modules, the operator's console, and out the other side, vaporizing everything in its path. The explosion that tore through the Podlet K1 radar blinded an entire sector of Russian air defense. But the mission wasn't over. The second Rybacha drone was already approaching its own target, the P-18 Spoon Rest early warning radar, the system responsible for detecting incoming aircraft far beyond the horizon. The Russian crew scrambled. The Pantsir switched to thermal imaging backup, scanning for the heat signature of electric motors. But dawn was rising, and with it came a temperature inversion. Cool air sat trapped beneath a layer of warm air, distorting infrared readings and creating shimmering false targets. The drone's tiny electric engines barely ran 10 degrees hotter than the surrounding air, and against the warming sea, which still held yesterday's heat, it blended in perfectly. At times it even appeared colder than the background. The Pantsir's algorithm, designed to track jet engines glowing at hundreds of degrees, lost lock entirely. The gunner fired blind, a spiral of tracer rounds expanding outward from the drone's last known position. This water hose tactic sometimes worked against helicopters too big to change course instantly. But the Rybacha could pivot 90 degrees in half a second. 5,000 rounds thundered skyward, and not a single hit connected. Moments later, the second Rybacha struck the P-18 radar dead center. A blinding flash illuminated the coastline, and in an instant, 200 kilometers of radar coverage vanished. With both radar systems down, the corvette positioned 4 kilometers offshore was now blind. Its protective shield, the early warning network that was supposed to detect threats long before they arrived, had collapsed. The ship was now alone, defenseless, and the enemy was coming. The ship's radar caught fleeting contacts, ghost echoes that flickered in and out of existence. Each sweep revealed strange shapes barely 3 meters above the sea, vanishing again before a lock could be made. The radar couldn't tell whether it was seeing small drones or breaking waves. To make matters worse, Doppler filtering, which usually separated motion from background clutter, failed completely. The drones were flying at variable speeds, between 80 and 120 knots, making them look identical to moving sea spray. The ship's clutter rejection system, meant to clean up radar images, started deleting real targets as false ones. Every third rotation, the drones simply disappeared from the screen. Still, the Russian crew tried to respond. They activated the AK-630M2 Duet, twin 30mm rotary cannons capable of firing 10,000 rounds per minute. The mechanical whine filled the air as they spun up. Tracer fire arced across the sea. The ship's fire control computer began running Kalman filter algorithms, mathematical models predicting where a target will move next based on its previous path and sensor data. It was like trying to predict where a zigzagging bird might go next by blending its last few moves with physics. But the Ukrainian operators were constantly changing direction every 2 seconds. Each new move reset the math before it could settle. The AK-630M2 had been designed to engage supersonic cruise missiles, not drones weighing less than 200 kilograms. It was a sledgehammer trying to hit a mosquito. The targeting calculations took 3.5 seconds. The drones changed course every 2. The result: endless missed shots and wasted ammunition. The corvette then deployed its PK-10 decoy system. Within moments, the sky filled with bursts of aluminum chaff. Thin metallic strips cut to half the wavelength of radar. Each strip reflected radar waves, creating hundreds of fake contacts on every Russian display within 50 kilometers. Against radar-guided missiles, this tactic could create near-total confusion. But against human-guided drones using live camera feeds, it only made the morning sky glitter. The Ukrainian operators ignored the light show. They kept their crosshairs locked on the ship. Next, the corvette activated its TK-25E electronic countermeasure suite, blasting over 200 watts of interference across a massive frequency range, from 20 megahertz to 40 gigahertz. Normally, this would sever any radio-controlled drone's link instantly. But the Ukrainian drones weren't normal. They used frequency-hopping spread-spectrum technology, jumping between 128 channels per second in a randomized pattern known only to their operators. The Russian jamming managed to cause flickers, a few seconds of static, a frame drop here and there, but never enough to break control. The once crisp 1080p feed dropped to 480p. Annoying, yes, but still entirely usable. Sensing imminent attack, the corvette's captain ordered evasive maneuvers. Engines roared as the 949-ton vessel began S-turns at full throttle. But physics was not on their side. The massive ship needed 15 seconds just to change heading by 30 degrees. The drones needed 50 milliseconds to adjust course. The Ukrainian operator watched the ship's motion pattern carefully. He knew the corvette would have a brief, steady moment between turns. And that's when he made his move. At 500 meters out, the lead drone dropped altitude to only 3 meters, switching to manual control. The radar mast, 6 meters of vital electronics, filled the drone's camera feed. The AK-630 cannons couldn't aim low enough to intercept. Their guns stopped at -5 degrees, leaving a blind zone directly above the waterline. Sailors scrambled on deck with PKM machine guns, firing desperately, but the target was too fast. The drone crossed their entire field of vision in less than a second. Human eyes needed time. 0.2 of a second to focus, 0.3 to track, 2 full seconds to aim. By then, the drone was long gone. They were literally shooting at after images burned into their sight. The lead Bober drone leveled out, aimed squarely at the corvette's radar mast, the heart of its electronic warfare system. Its shaped charge was designed to punch through the steel housing and neutralize all radar arrays in one strike. On the bridge, the captain screamed orders: "Initiate emergency launch sequence." The crew scrambled to fire their Kalibr missiles before the ship lost power, but it was already too late. The launch process required 2 full minutes for gyro calibration, targeting alignment, and missile warm-up. The drones were only 30 seconds away. At 25 seconds to impact, both Ukrainian drones locked their trajectories. No more weaving, no more evasive paths. Now they were committed. From this point forward, they were nothing less than guided warheads. The first Bober drone streaked across the water like a low-flying missile, its electric motors whining with an almost metallic hum. At barely 3 meters altitude, the reflection off the sea made it invisible to radar. Even optical sensors struggled. Each time sunlight glanced off the waves, the drone vanished in glare. The Russian gunners tried one last burst, a wall of 30mm fire that tore across the horizon, but the rounds exploded behind the target. The AK-630M2 fire control radar, temporarily blinded by sea clutter, was tracking phantom echoes. The real threat was already under it. At 7 seconds to impact, the corvette's captain shouted, "Brace for contact!" Somewhere below deck, sailors dove behind bulkheads. The drone slammed into the forward radar mast with pinpoint precision. The explosion was deafening. A white-orange fireball erupted from the bridge roof, followed by a thunderclap that rolled across the bay. The entire radar array assembly was shredded. Power flickered, screens went black, and within 2 seconds, the corvette's electronic warfare suite went silent. Smoke poured from the impact site, and through it, the second drone emerged, flying even lower. This one was armed with a heavier warhead, modified for penetration. The operator guided it toward the ship's starboard midsection, just above the waterline, where fuel and ammunition storage were concentrated. On board, Russian crew members scrambled for damage control, but they never got the chance. At 4 seconds to impact, the ship's automated sprinkler system triggered, jets of seawater spraying across the deck, glistening in the morning sun. At 2 seconds, the second drone pitched up slightly, an adjustment to ensure the warhead struck just below the deck armor. Then, impact. A second explosion tore the ship open. This time, the detonation blew a hole clean through the hull. Within seconds, secondary blasts followed, ammunition cooking off, diesel fuel igniting. The corvette began to list, its bow lifting slightly as water rushed in through the breach. Fire spread from the radar tower to the bridge, consuming the entire upper deck in thick black smoke. From overhead, the drone's final video feed captured the scene. A burning warship, its once sleek silhouette twisted and broken, now swallowed by smoke and flame. The feed cut out as the onboard camera melted in the heat. 30 seconds later, the corvette's power systems failed completely. Its communication antenna sparked once, twice, then went dark. The Kalibr missiles in their vertical launch tubes never fired. Their guidance systems, deprived of power, shut down automatically to prevent detonation. By the time rescue vessels from Sevastopol arrived, the corvette was already listing 30 degrees to port. Within the next hour, the ship rolled onto its side, and by dawn it had slipped beneath the surface. Only the burning slick of fuel oil and fragments of superstructure remained visible on the waves. Satellite imagery later confirmed what the world suspected. The ship was identified as a Project 22,160 patrol corvette, one of Russia's newer vessels, commissioned only a few years earlier. Its loss was a severe blow, not only in terms of material, but in reputation. A ship built to defend against high-speed missiles had been brought down by small, propeller-driven drones built at a fraction of the cost. In the hours following the attack, Russian air defense units across Crimea were thrown into chaos. Entire radar networks were reconfigured, frequencies shifted, and defensive batteries relocated inland. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Ukraine had found a way to pierce the shield. The Rybacha and Bober drones had proven a new doctrine. Speed wasn't everything. Stealth wasn't everything. Adaptability, that was the real weapon. By using small, low-cost systems guided by real-time intelligence and creative engineering, Ukraine had neutralized a ship thousands of times more expensive. In the months that followed, analysts around the world studied the footage frame by frame. Military observers compared it to the first days of aerial warfare in the early 20th century, a moment when old doctrines fell and new ones were born. Navies began quietly rewriting their playbooks, and the term drone swarm warfare entered the modern lexicon for good. As the smoke cleared from the Black Sea, one fact remained undeniable. The battlefield was evolving faster than ever, and those who failed to adapt would be left behind. What you've just witnessed wasn't science fiction. It was the new face of naval warfare, captured in real time. If this cinematic breakdown helped you understand how modern drone tactics are reshaping the battlefield, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next wave of footage from the front lines is coming soon, and you won't want to miss it.